Matthew, everyday audiophile, music lover, and beer enthusiast. Now, as always, we're going to start with the beer. And this one comes from the Ozarks. This is the Elliott Bay Ride the Cyclone. It's a hazy IPA. And seeing as this isn't a beer that I normally have access to, we're going to pour this into an IPA glass. Today's topic, for those of you that have watched at least a couple of my videos, you know that I currently am using a Rega RP10 as my turntable. It's been my reference for the last 13 years, and this is a terrible pour. Not because there aren't better turntables out there, but for the dollar and for the value and for the sound that I like, it has just always been a wonderful turntable. I also like the fact that I haven't really had to touch it. Besides traditional turntable things like rebalancing the tone arm when you move the turntable or move it onto a new surface, besides those things, you don't really have to touch the Rega turntables, and that is something that I particularly enjoy. I'm using it with a Rega Afita 3 cartridge, though hopefully I will be getting an Aphelion 2 soon, and then I'm using Rega's reference or a preamp. And I love this sound combination. It is just so insightful, and it has such great energy and synergy that I don't really have any desire to go to anything else. The only other turntable that I'm looking at would maybe be the next generation Rega flagship. So right now it's the Rega Naya, so whatever the Naya 2 is. And then maybe the VPI Forever series. They have a Model 1 right now, but I think they're coming out with a Model 2 and Model 3, and we'll see what those look like. But so far, this one's hard to beat, especially considering how great it sounds even 13 years later. But let's give this a drink, and then we can continue on with the video. That is quite nice. It is always lovely having a beer in an IPA glass. The purpose behind it is that you are grabbing it like this, like as you would a normal glass, and the heat from your hands causes more bubbles to form, and then that releases the flavor in the beer, or at least that's the theory. The opening here is the right size for you to smell as you're drinking. And overall, I would say that it is a wonderful glass. It's terrible to clean, though. That's why I don't use it that often. But okay, Rega RP10. So as I alluded to in my last video, I've been looking at turntable mats. And this is the first time for me. For the last ever, I've been using this Rega turntable. I've been using the standard Rega felt mat. And you know, I like the way that it sounds. Obviously, I've kept it for some time, but one issue that I've always dealt with Rega turntables, this includes the P9 that I have downstairs, is the static. Especially during the winter here in Texas, it can get pretty dry, and I'm always dealing with a felt mat that just comes up with the record as I pull it off. I've tried every suggestion online to reduce the staticness of this felt mat, and I've just come to accept it as a part of life. When I pull that record off, 70% of the time this mat is coming with it, and I gotta peel it off, and you can hear the static as you're pulling that mat off of the record. So it really wasn't until the last, 3 or 4 months that I decided to really give mats a second consideration. And the reason that I kind of stopped when I first looked into it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, so in the current Rega turntables, this would be their P1 to their P8, or in my generation, the RP1 to the RP8. With those lower end turntables, you get a felt mat that is approximately 2 to 3 millimeters thick. So it's a thicker felt mat. Only on the P9, RP10, and now planar 10 did they switch to a felt mat that is thinner. This is about 1.5 millimeters thick. And so the issue with finding a mat for these higher end Rega turntables is the tone arm doesn't have VTA adjustment, right? It can't adjust the height. And Whether you consider that a feature or a flaw, that makes finding a mat incredibly difficult. It really limits your choices. If some of the mats that I wanted to try, like the thicker Herbies Way Excellent 2, that requires a shim. And I didn't really feel up to the task of putting in the shim just to try a mat and then figure out a way to switch back and forth. So that one was out for just a little bit. And I know it's only 2 millimeters thick, but that half a millimeter, I think, will make a difference. And I think I'd be required to put a half millimeter shim, but that's another topic. So what I landed on was still Herbies, but instead of their Way Excellent, it's their higher end Grungebuster. And you can see this is probably way white according to the camera. The easiest way to describe it to me is some kind of rubber, but according to their website, it is a viscoelastic polymer, a proprietary blend. Penny, come here. Come here. Aside from that description of this polymer, you can't really find any other information on it other than they claim it is the superior choice for either matless turntables or the high-end Rega ceramic turntables. And so that's what the RP10 has. That's what my P9 has that's downstairs. The planer 10, the Naya, they all use a ceramic platter. And as far as thickness is concerned, it is 1.6 millimeters. So if you place the felt mat and the Grungebuster here side by side, yeah, they're about the same height. Even taking a picture, it looks like the felt mat is taller, but if you run your finger along the two, you can feel that the Grungebuster is just ever so slightly thicker. But a tenth of a millimeter, I don't think that's going to cause any issues with VTA, and so went ahead and ordered it and put it in. Now, as far as testing is concerned, for better or worse, I'm of the opinion that records do need a rest time after being played. I subscribe to that whole 24 hours, you play it once, you have to wait before you play it again. And so I limited my testing to albums that I have, for better or worse, multiple copies of. In this case, that landed me with Doug Burr, Oh Ye Devastator. This is one of my favorite albums, actually. I'm not sure why I have two. And Azure Ray, As Above, So Below. Now, at least for this one, it's a 45, which is nice. It's not my favorite recording ever, but it's well recorded. And so that makes it a little bit easier to compare with, especially since it's a 45. The testing criteria was really pretty simple. I would play the first track on either side of the record, so one at a time. Let's take track 1 of Azure Ray, and then switch mats, track 1 again. And I went back and forth 5 or 6 times, taking notes between the two. And I gotta say, there's differences. Very immediately, you can tell that the Grungebuster is a quieter mat. And what I mean from that really is that there is a darker background that comes from the records. It's the same sensation that I got when I switched from a regular Gen 2 player to using Diretta, where there was just an overall drop in the noise floor, and now I was starting to hear details that I knew were there because I could hear them in the digital version, but sometimes I felt like I was missing. They suddenly popped. They were there. Additionally, there was a little bit more three-dimensionality in the soundstage, right? So not that the apparent room size increased a ton, right? When you think of depth and width, it's more that where things were placed in the soundstage became a little bit more accurate compared to, say, the same track on digital. So, and this is what I've noticed a few times listening to the analog version versus digital. Sure, there's going to be a difference in the mastering, and that could affect the sound staging of a certain track. But also, I think just the medium itself has something to do with it, and your turntable's ability to extract that information from the record. So just having this more stable platform for the record to sit on I think resulted in just better sound staging, better accuracy in that sound staging. It wasn't necessarily more tonally accurate. It's really in the lower noise of the background and the better three-dimensionality of the album overall. But that's not to say that the Rega felt mat was bad. I mean, there's a reason that Rega uses it. Their reasoning is that they believe they use all of these different components throughout the turntable. So they have their Tancast 8 that they use for the plinth, and then the ceramic platter. The felt, in their belief, is that because they're using all of these different materials that resonate and disperse vibrations at different frequencies, the felt mat is just an additional layer of different resonant frequencies that it is absorbing and getting rid of. And I like the way that it sounds. It wasn't until listening to this Herbies Grungebuster that I realized the felt mat does have a sound. It's a little bit more lively. It's got a little bit more energy. And it made me tap my foot a little bit more. That doesn't mean that the Herbies was not as exciting to listen to, but for some reason with the felt mat, maybe it's just because it's the sound that I remember. It's a sound that I've listened to for the last 13 years. That was the one that I was like, okay, yeah, this is nice. This is high energy. It drew you into the music. So I think just like any other component, it is two different ways of presenting the same music. And that leaves me with, which one do I prefer? That's tough. Do I want the one that draws me into the music more, or do I want the one that has the lower noise floor and more detail and better sound staging? Because you know how I feel about the sound staging. And I think where I'm going to land on this is the felt upstairs here with my Rega RP10 and the Grungebuster downstairs on my P9. It actually made a bigger difference on my P9 downstairs than it did on the RP10 here. And I think that just has to do with it being an older turntable. It doesn't have that bracing between the tone arm and the plinth, so it's not as rigid there. So it benefits more from a mat that provides better isolation from vibrations and anything. So for the price, I would say it's an absolute killer. It is a lovely mat. And if I didn't have the P9 downstairs, it would probably stay up here on my RP10. It's just that I only have one, and so I got to choose one place to put it. It had a bigger benefit downstairs, and to be honest, that P9 is such a lovely sounding turntable. I use it just as much as the RP10 upstairs. But that's mainly due to that system, the Q Acoustic Concept 500s with the Marantz Cinema 30. I use that system more than any other system because it's in the living room. This isn't the end of the turntable mat journey for me, though. I do have one more in the mail, and it should hopefully be here in the next week or two. That one is closer to the Rega, but still a little bit more firm and should deal with the static electricity a little bit better. So we'll see how that one turns out. I will talk about it whenever I get in, but until then, I will see y'all next time. Cheers.